Our speaker this hour is Wayne Berger. Wayne is another one of our speakers who really does not need much of an introduction to this audience. Wayne has been a fixture around here. When did you first come? 32 years. He's been here at Bear Valley. And just done an incredible work, and you can ask any of the alumni that are here who've had him as a teacher, and you know you'll get a testimony of just what he has meant to this place. This past summer, though, actually we're still in summer technically, I suppose, but he and Wheezy have decided to make the move and are in the process of doing that as we speak, to a mission itself and the work that they will be doing, and our loss is their gain, and we certainly will miss. We know that God will use them and to do great things. I don't want to take any more of Wayne's time. Wayne, come preach the word to us.
Preach the word. I appreciate the introduction and appreciate you being here today. This is the first lesson on the Songs of Ascent. The Songs of Ascent are the Psalms from 120 through 134. So there are 15 of them, and they have a great message for us. Now, if you use the King James Version, it may have the word degree. In the New American Standard, you have a subtitle there that says Songs of Ascent. The old versions and the old commentaries and the folks that 100 years or more ago have the word degree. So you can see what it's going to be like. When you look up the definition of it, it simply means to elevate, to go to a higher degree, a greater rhythm, a number of definitions like this as far as the idea of ascent. And so as we stop and start to look at these Psalms, what I want to do today is give you some background information about them, some interesting things about them, and then the last part we'll try to work our way through the 7 of them. I've got Psalm 120 through 127. Now, the good guy that's preaching the rest of them, or tomorrow afternoon, John Moore, will take from 128 through the rest of them. So this is kind of a two-part series. And so we're going to look at what I want to do first is just kind of give you some history of them, some background, some traditions about them. And then we'll look at the Psalms themselves, and I'll try to work through a little bit of there and get so what? How does this apply, and what are some things we can learn from it? There's a fella, Hinsenberg, who suggested the pattern to them. Interestingly, as I said, there are 15 of them. The very middle one is Psalm 127. It's in the middle, and it's the only one written by Solomon. And then you have 7 before that and 7 after that. And this fellow pointed out the pattern. You have 2 written by David, 5 written by we don't know who. Then you got Solomon's in 127. Then you got 2 written by David and 5 written by folks we don't know who. Now, I don't know if that makes any significance or not. If you find some significance in it, please let me know. But don't be thinking about it now. Tell me later. And that's the way they're arranged. G. Campbell Morgan, a famous preacher 150 years ago, had this idea about their location of being 120 to 134. He said they follow the greatest passage that honors the Word of God. Psalm 119, as you know, is 176 verses exalting the Word of God and praising God. And the Word of God, you're going to want to go to worship. And that's what these 120 to 134 Psalms seem to be as to what they were. Now, as I said, they're called songs of ascent. And that word simply means to go to a higher elevation. It is used in other passages to convey that same idea. He moved it wrong, that's 1 Samuel 13, and then he moved it right, and again the word ascent is there. When Solomon moved the Ark of the Covenant into the temple, that word ascent is there. So the idea of understanding what it means, it does mean to go up, to elevate, to some degrees. Now, to what were they ascending, and who was it that was ascending, may have some question marks. There are some say, okay, let's look at the psalm itself. One thing is, some have tried to figure out if there's some kind of degree or ascent in the music or in the rhythm or something like that. Some have said, and the Mishnah verifies this, there was a tradition that there were 15 steps between the court of the women and the court of the Israelite men. And that the Levites, in the process of their work, would sing a different psalm of the ascent on each step. They would that song and had 15 steps, and so they went through that way. There was also the idea and tradition, and again, some of this is kind of verified to some degree, that there were 15 semicircle steps leading into the temple. And that the priest, the others were the Levites, the priest would sing one of these psalms on each step. Now, I don't know how often they do that every day or once a month or whatever, but that's some of the tradition as to what the ascent was. It was the steps leading from one place to another. It is also very interesting, in the Hebrew language, each letter has a point value. Now, in the Hebrew language, they didn't have vowels. And the two words for Jehovah or Jah is Jah, J-H, that's got 15. You got these 15 different steps, and so maybe that's where this came from, and maybe that's the ascent they're talking about. A more likely account of where they were ascending and who was doing the ascending is probably the idea that, as you know, there were 3 annual feasts that all males were supposed to go from where they lived to Jerusalem to observe that feast. And that as they ascended to Jerusalem, they would sing these songs, the songs of ascent. And that's probably more so true. But, you know, it could be both. The priests and the Levites could have been doing their thing on these steps, and at the same time, you could have had these pilgrimages who are coming along their way and headed to Jerusalem. Of course, in the Scriptures, Old and New Testament, going to Jerusalem is always spoken of as going up. They were ascending. It's an elevation of about 2,400 feet. It's not the highest point. It is the highest point in basically Judea area. You still have Mount Hermos that's bigger, but it's always spoken of as ascending. You can also just picture in your mind these folks, particularly the men, but there were women also who traveled that way, would leave their towns and villages and begin walking to Jerusalem. And you know, nearly everybody walked. There were a few donkeys that they'd ride, but generally speaking, everybody was walking. And you can imagine that as they start out from this little village down here, and there's 3 or 4 men, and come to the next little village, and 3 or 4 more men join them, and move on a little farther, and a few more men join them, and pretty soon you got a whole crowd. And they're walking 60 or 70 miles. What do you do when you walk 60 or 70 miles? I know you got your earbuds in and you're listening to music. They didn't have it then, so they quite often sang. And that's probably the songs of ascent. That's probably the most logical reason and event or to explain what they're talking about. And they would sing as they go, and they go along there. As you would continue to walk, you'd sing more and more songs, more and more people there. That's not uncommon. Back in the Civil War days, and even prior to that, and sometime after that, soldiers quite often, as they marched from one place to another, would sing songs as they marched. Well, this is a similar situation. They're marching up to Jerusalem. They're probably singing as they go, and so that's the songs of ascent. We have at least 10 songs in our musical repertoire today that came out of those kinds of situations. Maryland, My Maryland, Bonnie Blue Flag, a number of songs that you probably don't know, and I don't really know. I'm old, but I'm not that old. And but there are a number of our songs that we sing today, or that in the repertoire of folks, that came about, were used in the military as the people would march from one place to another, particularly like in the Civil War when they marched those things. This is a side note, but it won't cost you anything extra. In 1862, when the Union forces were on one side of the Rappahannock River and the Confederate forces were on the other side of the river, and it's Christmas time, together they sang Home Sweet Home. Don't you know they wanted to go? But that's what I'm talking about. You have these situations where you are marching and wrong, or you're walking along, and that seems to be what this is, and I think that's probably the most logical explanation for songs of ascent. But as I said, that would not necessarily have to rule out that the Levites did it and that the priests did it. But that's the situation. The logical question then becomes, who is ascending and to what are they ascending? And as I said, I think probably you've got these folks that are traveling and they're ascending to Jerusalem for this feast day, and they're singing these songs as they go. Now the message is going to be, what do these psalms say to us? What did it say to them? Is there any connection with all of these? I find a little bit of connection between one psalm and the next one. I think there can be some connection with all of that. And I'm going to read these and point out some of these thoughts and then draw a conclusion. And my explanation and my lesson that I draw may be all right. You may think of something better. But let's start, and if you will, turn with me and we'll read and talk about each of these. We're going to start with Psalm 120. Psalm 120. In my trouble I cried to the Lord, and he answered me. Deliver my soul, O Lord, from lying lips, from a deceitful tongue. What shall be given to you, and what more shall be done to you, you deceitful tongue? Sharp arrows of the warriors, with the burning coals of the broom tree. Woe is me, for I sojourn in Meshech, for I dwell among the tents of the Kedar. Too long has my soul had its dwelling with those who have peace. I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war. This first psalm is about trouble. Why would you start this? You're going to a festival that's happiness. Why would you start with a song about trouble? Well, you know, trouble can cause us to turn to God. And if you notice, what was their trouble? They were living among wicked people. Notice what he says here, you see. In my trouble I cried to the Lord, and he answered me. Deliver my soul, O Lord, from lying lips, from deceitful tongues. He goes on down, even concludes, I'm for peace and they're for war. So their trouble was, here were some godly people living in a troubled world, going to Jerusalem where they could find peace. And so you start your songs, you start this repertoire talking about the trouble we've had. We live in a society of trouble. You know, you almost nowadays, every time you deal with somebody you don't know, is how are they trying to scam me? How are they trying to steal from me? Every time you put your credit card in a gas pump, somebody may be stealing your identity. We live in that kind of world. That's what they were living in. And they're saying, I want to get out of this. And I appreciate it, Jack. That's the reason it has to sing. What do we sing? This world is not my home. I'm just a passing through. That's the idea here. And so these folks had all these problems that they're leaving behind. And they're dealing with people who are lying, who are cheating them, who are wanting to make war. And where are they going? They're going up to Jerusalem, where they can find peace and joy and happiness and serve their God. And so that's part of the reason, although it might seem strange, that they start with a song about trouble. We'll go to Psalm 121. Let me read that one. I will lift up my eyes to the mountains. From where shall my help come? My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. He will not allow your foot to slip. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade on your right hand. The sun will not smite you by day, and the moon by night. The Lord will protect you from all evil. He will keep your soul. The Lord will guard your going out and your coming in from this time forth and forever. Psalm 120 was trouble. Where do you look when you have trouble? When there's hardships and difficulties in your life, where do you go? You know, sometimes when going through hard times and difficulties, our head begins to bow. We begin to be down spiritually, mentally, physically. We look it down. Where did these folks look? Notice what it says. If I get to the right psalm here. Psalm 119, I sure don't have time to preach that one. I will lift up my eyes to the mountains. Now, the mountain wasn't where there was going to help them. Notice the rest of it. From where shall my help come? My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. So now then, this psalm says, we are going to find answers. We're going to find some help. And this help's going to be where the direction we're going. We're going to Jerusalem. Jerusalem's in the mountains. I'm going to lift up my eyes to the mountains. But they're not looking to the mountains for help. They're looking for the one who dwells in the mountains. 3 times in these songs of ascent, you have the expression, talking about God, who made heaven and earth. They didn't look to Jerusalem. They didn't expect the mountains to help them, but they expected the God that created the mountains to help them. And so we have in this psalm the help. Where do you look? Where do we look when we need help? We're all going to have troubles in our life. Physically, health issues, money issues, problems with neighbors, folks being wicked around us. Where are we going to go? We're going to lift up our eyes to the God who made the heavens and the earth. We're going to lift up our eyes to knowing He's the one that can deliver us. And then Psalm 122. Excuse me. Got another thing here. Psalm 121 is interesting. The tradition is in the Jewish families that on the right side, about a third of the way up on the doorpost, was a little pocket, mezuzah, I think it was. And in that little pocket by the door, there were some scriptures. And as a Jewish family, a person left the house, he reached up and touched that mezuzah. And he quoted Psalm 121, 5 and 8. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shades on your right hand. The sun will, and then verse 8, the Lord will guard your going out and your coming in from this time forth and forever. And so the idea is that for these people, they were looking to God for help and protection. And so as they left the house, they touched that and they quoted those verses. asking God to help them in the deliverance of in their travels. And so they're going to that for protection. Then Psalm 122. I am glad when they said to me, nope, let me point something else. I meant to point something else out. Look at verse 3 of Psalm 121. He will not allow your foot to slip. Throughout the Psalms, slipping of the feet is an expression of hardships or difficulties or falling away or something like that. And so notice what he said. The Lord will not let your foot slip. You're going to lift your eyes to this mountain, but you're not looking at the mountain. You're looking at the one who created the mountains. And you look to him for protection when you travel, because it says he won't let your foot slip. Now then, let's go to Psalm 122. I was glad when they said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. Our feet are standing within your gates, O Jerusalem. Jerusalem that is built as a city that is compact together, to which the tribes go up, even the tribes of the Lord. An ordinance for Israel to give thanks to the name of the Lord. For their thrones were set for judgment, the thrones of the house of David. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May they prosper who love you. May peace be within your walls and prosperity within your palaces. For the sake of my brothers and my friends, I will now say, may peace be within you. For the sake of the house of the Lord our God, I will seek you. Notice a couple of things here. They now not only are looking to God, but they're looking at the protection that he can give them. As we saw a little bit as they left Psalm 121 and they touched this thing, they were asking for God's protection as they traveled. And so now then, this psalm says, this is not only where to look, but Psalm 121 tells you what you'll get. You'll have the protection of God in doing this in Psalm 122. And I was glad when they said to let us go up to the house of the Lord. Our feet are standing. Notice that. What do we find in 121? God will keep your feet from slipping. He said, now when I get into the house of God, when I get into this special place, my feet are secure. They would not fall. God will not let your feet slip as long as you're standing in that place. Let's just do it. Let's turn to Hebrews 12 and look at verses 20 through 24. And it's the same message for us today with regard to our relationship to God and the place he wants us to go for protection and to help us solve our problems. Hebrews 12, I'll begin reading in verse 22. But you have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and the myriads of angels, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood which speaks better things than the blood of Abel. You and I are in that spiritual Zion, the church, but we're also looking for that heavenly Jerusalem, that heavenly place that has protection. Jesus said he said, they're in my Father's hands and nobody can get them out of there. We have this perfection. And that's what these psalmists, these travelers were singing as they go. We're leaving a land and we're living a land of trouble. Where are we going to go to find help? We're going to lift up our eyes to the mountains, to the one who made the mountains. And in Psalm 122, because we're going to find protection there. He can protect us. Psalm 123. To you I lift up my eyes, O you who are enthroned in the heavens. Behold, as the eyes of the servants look to the hand of their master, as the eyes of a maid to the hand of her mistress, so our eyes look to the Lord our God until he is gracious to us. Be gracious to us, O Lord. Be gracious to us. For we are greatly filled with contempt. Our soul is greatly filled with the scoffing and those who are at ease, and with the contempt of the proud. Psalm 120 was trouble. Psalm 121 said we're going to find help in the God who made the mountains. Psalm 122, we're going to find a place of protection. Notice what we see in Psalm 123. He said, lift up your eyes, and here he describes how they look. Let's notice that. Psalm 123. To you I lift up my eyes, O you who are enthroned in the heavens. Behold, as the eyes of a servant look to the hand of their master, as the eyes of the maid to the hand of her mistress, so our eyes look to the Lord our God until he is gracious to us. He said, we are looking to you as our master. We are your servants, and we're going to be obedient to you. And so we not only have to look to God, this psalm says you also have to be submissive to him. Just like a servant and a maid are going to be submissive to their master and to their maiden that's in charge of them. That's the way these people did, and that's what you and I must do. We must not only lift our eyes to God, we've got to have the eyes of a servant that says, I'm going to submit to you. Amen. And then he also says to why they're submitting. The last part of verse 2, and then on into verse 3. So our eyes look to the Lord our God until he is gracious to us. Be gracious to us, O Lord. Be gracious to us, for we are greatly filled with contempt. Our soul is greatly filled with the scoffing of those who are at ease, and with the contempt of the proud. We're going to lift our eyes. We're going to be submissive as servants because we need your grace. We need for you to be gracious to us. And again, he's back to the same thought that was in Psalm 120. Why? Because the people around whom you live. Look the people that live around. Verse 3, be gracious to us, O Lord. Be gracious to us. For we are greatly filled with contempt. Our soul is greatly filled with the scoffing of those who are at ease, with the contempt of the proud. When you live in that kind of society where Christians today are looked down on, Christians are being persecuted more and more all over the world. It's happening in America. And so we lift up our eyes and we're submissive to our God so that he'll be gracious to us and help us as we deal with these things. Then Psalm 124. Psalm 124 is about what they remembered. Let me read these verses. Had it not been the Lord who was on our side, let Israel now say, had it not been the Lord who was on our side, when men rose up against us, then they would have swallowed us alive. When their anger was kindled against us, then the waters would have engulfed us. The stream would have swept over our soul. Then the raging waters would have swept over our soul. Blessed be the Lord, who has not given us to be torn by their teeth. Our soul has escaped as a bird out of the snare of the trap. The snare is broken, and we have escaped. Our help is in the name of the Lord, who made heaven and earth. So what's it about? Notice he says twice, had it not been the Lord who was on our side, Verse 2, had it not been the Lord who was on our side, men rose up against us. Then they would have swallowed us alive. When their anger was kindled against us, then the waters would have engulfed us. They're remembering the protection God has given them in the past. We would have been destroyed as a people. We would have been destroyed maybe as an individual. But we remembered what God did. And we're now facing trouble around us. And it reminds us, we remind ourselves of what God has done in the past. You and I can look to God for protection. We need to be submissive. And one of the protections, in fact, that we can have what we have, and when we're in that troubled situation, we can know that God will help us because we remember what He's done in the past. I think all of us, if we've had this kind of relationship with God, can remember situations where God delivered us, where we didn't know what we were going to do. But through God's providence, He answered our prayers. And that's one of the things we've seen in the Psalm. You listened, you answered, you heard. We have that kind of confidence. And not only from reading the Scriptures, but from remembering what God has already done for us in the past. What a great blessing that is. And then Psalm 125. Those who trust in the Lord are as Mount Zion, which cannot be moved but abides forever. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds His people from this time forth and forever. For the scepter of the wickedness shall not rest upon the land of the righteous, so that the righteous will not be put forth their hands to do wrong. Do good, O Lord, to those who are good, to those who are upright, and to the hearts. But as for those who turn aside to their crooked ways, the Lord will lead them away with the doers of iniquity. Peace be upon Israel. So here, not only has it spoken about the confidence, spoken about the protection, but here he speaks about the confidence they have. I know we're going to have protection, and I'm confident that you're going to guide and direct us. I know that you're going to protect us. And notice the reason for that protection, as he said in verse 2, as the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds His people. Amen. As they were headed to Jerusalem, Jerusalem was up in the top of the mountains. And in a sense, he is saying Jerusalem was protected because they had the mountains all around them. The enemies could not get to them. Now, they did finally because they quit following God. God let them get to them. But he said, that's our confidence. We can, as we're walking, and you can see this, and we've done it, you've done it in this area. As you drive toward Denver, you see the mountains a long way off. And so it is with these folks. They could see the mountains of Jerusalem. And they said, that's the reason we have confidence. Because Jerusalem is protected by the mountains that are there. The same thing could be said as we are a part of the church. And that church is that mountain of God. And that we're going to be protected as a mountain is protected. And then Psalm 126. And for many years, this has been my favorite psalm. When the Lord brought back the captives, ones of Zion, we were like those who dream. Then our mouth was filled with laughter, and our tongues with joyful shouting. Then they said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us. We're glad. Restore our captivity, O Lord, as the streams in the south. Those who sow in tears shall reap with joyful shouting. He who goes to and fro weeping, carrying his bag of seed, shall indeed come again with a shout of joy, bringing his sheaves with him. Notice how many times joy is mentioned in one form or another. And the title of this psalm to me is Joy. And I'll give you thoughts about it in a moment. But stop and look at it. Look at verse 1 even. When the Lord brought back the captive ones of Zion, we were like those who had a dream. It's too great. It's like I woke up in a great dream. Look at the words in verse 5, joyful. In verse 6, joy. And there's some others. The word glad is there in verse 3. This psalm is a psalm of joy. And I think it's sort of coming down to the conclusion of what they've been singing about. That there's protection. We've been in trouble, and God will protect us. God has a place of protection. He can protect us and all those kinds of things. And that leads us to have joy. Now, he describes that joy with three metaphors that I love. First metaphor is, when the Lord brought back the captive ones of Zion, we were like those who dream. A lot of folks think that's deliverance from Babylonian captivity. I don't think so, because they knew when they're coming out of captivity. Jeremiah said, you're going to stay there 70 years. So I think this is some other captivity, and I can give you the scriptures on that. But the idea is, joy is freedom. We've been in captivity, and now that we're set free, we have people today who are in captivity. Sin, alcohol, drugs, pornography, sex, materialism. Joy is freedom. And of course, Jesus said you shall know the truth will make you free. And we could talk about all kinds of things that he would say could deliver us from. But as these folks were summing up their deliverance to Jerusalem, it said it's all led to joy. Second metaphor that he uses is in verse 4. Restore our captivity. Well, restore what we lost, O Lord, as the streams in the south. The south is the Negev. It's a dry desert area. And he's talking about streams. Well, that part of that country, they're dry riverbeds. And most of the time they're just dry. But when it rains up there, those riverbeds become flooded with water. It's a joy to those folks who don't get much rain. They now have a stream that's full of water. And it's a joy. I like to tell the account. Harvey Porter did a great work in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And he was an amateur archaeologist. He would go to Israel and dig around all over there. And he said one night, one afternoon, he took his little group, and they were over there, and they set up their tents, and they were there getting ready for the night. And some Arab came out. He said, I don't know what he was saying, but he was mad. And so finally, we moved. He said, yeah. So he said, we undid our camps and moved over here and camped somewhere else. He said, when we got up the next morning, it had rained up there, and right where we were camping was a full river. He said, we'd have been covered up. We'd have been flooded. This man was doing him a favor. He didn't know it. But that's the fullness of the stream. When you live in a desert area, a full stream brings joy. Amen. Third metaphor. He comes down here, and this is a little strange too. Those who sow in tears shall reap with joy, joyful shouting. He who goes to and fro weeping, carrying his bag of seed, shall indeed come again with a shout of joy, bringing his sheaves with him. What is that all about? Here's what it seems to be, folks are saying. They had been in captivity. They weren't able to gather the crops like they needed to. They had just enough food, seed, to eat a while. The choice was, fix your seed into food and eat and die, or plant your seeds and plan for the next year and trust God that he'll provide for you that year. And so they're sowing their seeds and weeping. They're crying, this is the last bit of wind I've got. But when they reap the joy. So joy is freedom. Joy is fullness. Joy is fruitfulness. And if I had more than 45 seconds, I'd go through a lot of ideas that the scriptures say in the New Testament about fruit. All kinds of fruit that being a Christian can produce. And then that 8th Psalm is the one right in the middle. The Song of Solomon that Solomon wrote. And it's about how to build. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman keeps it in vain. It is vain for you to rise up early and to retire late, to eat the bread of painful labors, for he gives to his beloved even to his sleep. And then behold, children are, and so on. That psalm says we must depend upon God as to how we build our house. We must trust in God on how we build our cities. We must trust God as we rear our children. And then, as time runs out, I'm going to say 2 or 3 great lessons that we learn from here. One, these folks were marching to Jerusalem and had a great joy to go to worship. That ought to be us. I remember Wayne Kilpatrick tells about his son. One night he's fussing about having to get ready to go to Sunday night service. And he said, why do I have to go? He said, you don't have to go, you get to go. That's the attitude we ought to have about going to worship. Second thing is, these psalms are about a relationship with God, and that's all. We need to have the attitude we're looking forward to going to worship. We need to look forward to the relationship. All of this is about a relationship with God. That's what it's all about. And so the Psalms of the Ascent, though old, are new. Those Psalms of Ascent that were good for them are also good for us. May they bless us as we study these great Psalms. Thank you.